The whistle of the train pierced the autumn air as Felicity Summers watched in horror as the locomotive pulled away from Cottonwood Station, billowing clouds of steam and coal smoke in its wake. Her trunks and valise sat beside her, the only remnants of the life she was leaving behind. The train, her ticket to San Francisco, and the teaching position that promised a fresh start disappeared around the bend, taking with it her hopes and carefully laid plans. Her brother had promised to meet her to help her board, but like so many of his promises, this one had turned to dust. "Madam." "You all right there?" The deep voice startled Felicity from her daze of disbelief. She turned to see a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by a worn leather hat. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but his eyes were startlingly clear beneath the brim. Those eyes, blue as a summer sky, held concern as they studied her. I missed my train," Felicity said, her voice quavering despite her best efforts. "My brother was supposed to be here. I waited as long as I could." The stranger nodded, understanding etched in the weathered lines of his face. He couldn't be much older than 30, but life had clearly left its mark. "Name's Kane Dawson," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Next train's not due for 3 days, I'm afraid." Felicity's heart sank. 3 days in this dusty outpost, with no accommodations arranged and limited funds, would be challenging enough. But the delay would cost her the teaching position she had worked so hard to secure. "I'm Felicity Summers," she replied, attempting to maintain her composure. "I suppose I'll need to find lodgings until then." Kane shifted his weight, glancing at her belongings. "Town's full up, mining companies brought in extra men, and the hotel's taken every room." Tears pricked at Felicity's eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. 22 years old and alone in a strange town was not how she had envisioned this journey west. "You're not alone now," Kane said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "I've got a small ranch about 2 miles outside of town. My sister's staying with me. It ain't much, but there's a spare room if you'd like." Felicity hesitated. Her mother had warned her about the dangers that awaited young women traveling alone in the territories. But something in Kane Dawson's honest gaze suggested he was offering genuine help, not harboring unsavory intentions. "That's very kind, Mr. Dawson, but I couldn't possibly impose." "No imposition," he insisted, already reaching for her trunks. "Hannah, that's my sister. She'd welcome the company. Been telling me the ranch needs a woman's touch besides hers." His smile was brief but genuine. "Besides, wouldn't be right to leave you stranded. These parts can be rough." As if emphasizing his point, a group of rowdy miners stumbled out of the saloon across the street, their loud voices carrying in the crisp October air of 1877. "Perhaps just for tonight," Felicity conceded, her practical nature recognizing the wisdom in accepting his offer. "I can look for other arrangements tomorrow." Kane nodded, loading her trunks onto his wagon with ease. He helped her climb onto the wooden seat, his hand strong and calloused against hers. As the horses pulled away from the station, Felicity cast one last glance at the empty tracks, wondering if she'd made the right decision. The landscape opened before them as they left Cottonwood behind, the town quickly giving way to rolling hills dotted with scrubby pines and juniper. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, lending an ethereal quality to the rugged terrain. "You from back east?" Kane asked, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "Boston," Felicity replied. "Though I've spent the last 4 years teaching in Chicago." Kane nodded. "Long way from home." "That was rather the point," she said, surprising herself with her candor. "My former fiancé, made quite clear that his political ambitions required a different sort of wife than I was prepared to be." The moment the words left her mouth, Felicity regretted them. Her personal troubles were hardly appropriate conversation with a stranger, but Kane didn't seem to find her disclosure unusual. "His loss," he said simply. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels creating a soothing melody. Felicity found herself relaxing, her earlier panic receding. "What brought you west, Mr. Dawson?" She asked, genuinely curious about this quiet, contemplative man. "Kane," he corrected. "The war, I suppose, didn't much like who I was during it or what was left of home after." His hands tightened momentarily on the reins. "Came west in '66. Worked cattle drives, broke horses, did some scouting for the army. Saved enough to buy the ranch 2 years back." Felicity nodded, sensing the weight of unspoken experiences behind his words. The Civil War had ended 12 years ago, but its shadows lingered for many. "And your sister?" She prompted. A genuine smile crossed his face. "Hannah lost her husband last year. Influenza. She came out to keep house for me, though I suspect she mostly wanted to make sure I wasn't living like a complete savage." Felicity laughed at that, finding it easy to picture this self-contained man being fussed over by a concerned sister. "There it is," Kane said, nodding toward the horizon where a modest homestead came into view. Dawson Ranch. The ranch was smaller than Felicity had imagined, a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, and a few outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and a small garden plot showed signs of careful tending. It was humble but welcoming, with smoke curling from the chimney and warm light glowing from the windows as dusk approached. A woman emerged from the cabin as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was younger than Felicity had expected, perhaps 25, with the same striking blue eyes as her brother. "Well, this is unexpected," Hannah said, her curious gaze taking in Felicity and her luggage. Kane jumped down from the wagon. "Hannah, this is Miss Felicity Summers." "Miss Summers, my sister Hannah Wilson. Miss Summers missed her train," Kane explained as he began unloading the trunks. "Next one's not for 3 days. Thought we might offer her the spare room till then." Hannah's face immediately softened. "Of course, you poor thing. Come inside before you catch your death in this evening air." Felicity found herself ushered into the cabin, which was surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the main room served as both kitchen and living area. Simple but sturdy furniture filled the space, and handmade quilts added color to the rustic interior. "I was just finishing supper," Hannah said. "Nothing fancy, but there's plenty. You can freshen up if you'd like. The washrooms through there were fortunate to have a pump inside." Kane insisted on modern conveniences. Felicity thanked her and took the opportunity to wash the travel dust from her face and hands. When she returned, Kane had brought in her luggage and was setting the table while Hannah ladled stew into earthenware bowls. Supper was a simple affair: venison stew, corn bread, and preserved peaches, but after a day of travel and stress, it tasted better than any meal Felicity could remember. The conversation flowed easily, with Hannah asking about Boston and Felicity's teaching experience. "Will you be teaching in San Francisco then?" Hannah asked as they cleared the dishes. Felicity's smile faltered. "That was the plan. The position was at a girls' academy, but they were quite clear that if I wasn't there by the 15th, they would offer it to someone else." "What day is the 15th?" Kane asked. "Monday," Felicity replied. "The day after tomorrow." Kane and Hannah exchanged a glance. "Even if you caught the train in 3 days, you wouldn't make it in time," Hannah said gently. Felicity nodded, the reality of her situation sinking in. "I know. I'll have to wire them tomorrow and explain. Perhaps they'll be understanding." Neither Kane nor Hannah looked convinced, but they didn't voice their doubts. "Cottonwood School might need a teacher," Hannah suggested. The last one left rather suddenly when she received a proposal from the bank manager in Prescott. "It's worth asking," Kane agreed. "Town's growing. Lot of families settling now that the Apache troubles have mostly passed." The mention of the local indigenous people sparked Felicity's curiosity. "Have you had many problems with the native tribes?" Kane's expression turned thoughtful. "Not personally. Most of the fighting happened before I settled here. The Army's got most of the Apache on reservations now." There was something in his tone, not quite regret, but perhaps a recognition of the complexity of the situation. "Kane did some scouting for the Army during the campaigns," Hannah explained. He speaks a bit of their language. Only enough to get by, Kane said dismissively. And hopefully not get killed. The conversation shifted to safer topics, and soon Hannah was showing Felicity to the spare room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest for clothes, and a small table with a basin and pitcher. I hope you'll be comfortable, Hannah said. It's not what you're used to, I'm sure. It's perfect, Felicity assured her. I can't thank you both enough for your kindness, Hannah smiled. Get some rest. Things often look brighter in the morning. Left alone, Felicity unpacked only what she needed for the night. As she changed into her nightgown, she found herself drawn to the small window. The moon had risen, casting silvery light over the ranch. In the distance, she could make out Kane's silhouette as he made a final check of the animals. There was something reassuring about his solid presence, something that made her feel safe despite the uncertainty of her situation. You're not alone now, he had said at the station. Simple words, but they had reached a place inside her that had felt increasingly isolated over the past months. As she climbed into bed, Felicity wondered what the morning would bring. Her carefully constructed plans lay in ruins, but perhaps, just perhaps, this unexpected detour might lead somewhere worth exploring. Dawn broke with the sound of roosters crowing and the distant lowing of cattle. For a moment, Felicity was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She dressed quickly in a practical blue cotton dress and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple knot. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Hannah already busy at the stove, the smell of coffee and frying bacon filling the cabin. Good morning, Hannah greeted her cheerfully. I hope you slept well, better than I expected, Felicity admitted. Can I help with anything? You could set the table if you don't mind. Kane's just finishing with the morning chores. He'll be in shortly. As if on cue, the door opened and Kane entered, bringing with him the crisp morning air and the earthy scent of the outdoors. He'd already been up for hours, judging by the work accomplished, yet he looked energized rather than tired. Morning, he said, nodding to Felicity as he hung his hat on a peg by the door. Sleep all right? Yes, thank you, she replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance in the bright morning light. Breakfast was hearty bacon, eggs, and biscuits with honey, and the conversation turned to plans for the day. I need to go into town, Felicity said. To send a telegram to the academy and inquire about the local school if you think that's worth pursuing. I'll take you, Kane offered. Need to pick up supplies anyway. An hour later, they were headed back toward Cottonwood, the morning sun warming the autumn air. Felicity found herself studying Kane's profile as he drove, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which wasn't often but was impactful when it happened. Tell me about your ranch, she said, genuinely interested in understanding more about this quiet man who had come to her rescue. Kane seemed surprised by her interest, but began to talk about his hopes for the property, the cattle he was raising, the horses he bred, the improvements he planned when funds allowed. His voice took on a different quality when he spoke about his land, a warmth and pride that revealed his deep connection to this place. It's not much compared to the big spreads, he admitted, but it's mine, paid for, no one can take it from me. There was a story there, Felicity sensed, but didn't press. Instead, she shared her own aspirations to teach, yes, but also to establish herself independently, away from the social constraints of Boston society and the painful memories of Chicago. Your family must worry about you being so far away, Kane remarked. My parents passed away when I was 16, Felicity explained. My brother Richard became my guardian, though he was only 22 himself at the time. He did his best, but... She trailed off, reluctant to speak ill of her only remaining family. We have different views on many things, including what's best for me. Kane nodded, understanding in his eyes. Family can be complicated. When they reached Cottonwood, the town was already bustling with activity. Miners, cowboys, and townsfolk moved along the boardwalks, and wagons rattled down the dusty Main Street. Kane helped Felicity down from the wagon and escorted her to the telegraph office. The telegram to San Francisco was brief, but clear, explaining her circumstance and expressing her regret. She knew even as she sent it that the response would almost certainly be that the position had been filled, but propriety demanded she make the effort. Next, Kane led her to a 2-story brick building at the end of the street, the schoolhouse. A weathered sign announced Cottonwood School established 1872. Mayor's office is next door, Kane explained. He's also on the school board. Mayor Harold Jenkins was a portly man with a walrus mustache and a booming voice that seemed at odds with the cramped confines of his office. He listened with interest as Felicity explained her qualifications and her situation. "Well now, Miss Summers, this is providential," he declared. "Miss Perkins eloped just last month, and we've been making do with Mrs. Wilson from the Mercantile filling in, but she's expecting her 4th child and can't continue much longer. The children need proper education." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The pay's not what you'd get in San Francisco, mind you. $40 a month, plus lodging in the rooms above the school. Term's already started, but if you could take over on Monday, we'd be most grateful." Felicity felt a surge of hope. It wasn't the prestigious position she'd anticipated, but it was teaching and a chance to stay in a place that, despite her short acquaintance with it, already felt less lonely than Chicago had after Edward had broken their engagement. "May I see the school?" she asked. Mayor Jenkins beamed. "Of course. I'll have Mrs. Wilson show you around this afternoon if that suits." Kane, who had remained silent during the interview, spoke up. "We have some errands to run, but we could return at 2 o'clock. With arrangements made, they stepped back into the sunshine. Kane glanced at Felicity, an unreadable expression on his face. "You're considering it," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I am," she admitted. "It's not what I planned, but then nothing about the last 24 hours has been." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Sometimes the unexpected turns out better than the plan." They spent the next few hours acquiring supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples for the ranch, as well as some personal items Felicity needed. Kane introduced her to several townspeople along the way, including the telegraph operator, the general store owner, and the doctor and his wife. Everywhere they went, Felicity noticed how people respected Kane. He wasn't effusive or particularly social, but there was a quiet authority about him that others recognized. She also noticed the speculative glances some cast her way, clearly curious about her relationship with the taciturn rancher. At the Mercantile, they met Mrs. Wilson, a cheerful woman in her early 30s whose rounded belly proclaimed her condition. She greeted the news of Felicity's interest in the teaching position with undisguised relief. "Oh, thank heavens. The children are dear, but 27 of them ranging from 6 to 16 is beyond my capabilities, especially now." She patted her stomach meaningfully. "I can show you the school when you return this afternoon." As promised, at 2 o'clock they met Mrs. Wilson at the schoolhouse. The building was plain but solid, with large windows to admit light and a pot-bellied stove in the center for heating. Rows of desks faced a larger teacher's desk at the front, and bookshelves lined one wall, though they were sparsely filled. "The curriculum is basic reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography," Mrs. Wilson explained as she showed Felicity around. "The older boys come mainly in winter when there's less work on the farms and ranches. The town's growing, though, so you might see more regular attendance as families settle." Above the schoolroom was a simple apartment, 2 rooms with basic furnishings. "It's not luxurious," Mrs. Wilson apologized, "but it's private and safe. The previous teachers have found it adequate." Felicity wandered through the space, envisioning herself living there, teaching in the room below. It was a far cry from the elegant academy in San Francisco, but there was something appealing about the simplicity, the directness of the need. "What do you think?" Kane asked quietly when Mrs. Wilson stepped away to open a window. Felicity turned to him, struck again by the intensity of his gaze. "I think I could do good work here," she said honestly. Something flickered in his eyes, approval, perhaps, or understanding. "Town would be lucky to have you." By the time they met with Mayor Jenkins again, Felicity had made her decision. She would accept the position, contingent on the expected telegram confirming that the San Francisco opportunity was indeed lost to her. "Splendid," Jenkins exclaimed, shaking her hand vigorously. "We'll have the contract drawn up immediately. You can move into the school apartment whenever you're ready." As they left the mayor's office, Felicity felt a strange mixture of disappointment and excitement. One door had closed, but another had opened, one she never would have discovered if not for missing that train. "Thank you," she said to Kane as they climbed back into the wagon for the return journey to the ranch. "For everything. If you hadn't offered me shelter yesterday, I don't know what I would have done." He adjusted the reins, his expression thoughtful. "Seems to me you'd have figured something out. You strike me as a woman who knows her own mind." The compliment, delivered in his straightforward manner, warmed her more than she expected. The ride back to the ranch was companionable, with Felicity pointing out wildflowers she recognized and Kane naming the distant mountains visible on the horizon. As they approached the ranch, Felicity found herself reluctant for the journey to end, enjoying both the striking landscape and her guide's quiet company. Hannah greeted them with news that a rider had delivered a telegram response from San Francisco. As Felicity had expected, the position had been offered to another candidate. Though she had anticipated this outcome, seeing it confirmed in black and white still stung. "I'm sorry," Hannah said, genuine sympathy in her voice. "Thank you, but it's all right," Felicity replied, squaring her shoulders. "I've accepted the position here in Cottonwood. I'll start on Monday." Hannah's face lit up. "That's wonderful news. The children need a proper teacher and you'll be close enough to visit." That evening after supper, Felicity sat on the porch, watching as the setting sun painted the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. The air held the first hint of autumn crispness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, its lonely cry echoing across the hills. Kane joined her, offering a cup of coffee which she accepted gratefully. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, nodding toward the sunset. "It is," she agreed. "So different from Boston or Chicago. There's a vastness here, a sense that anything is possible." He nodded, seeming to understand exactly what she meant. They sat in companionable silence, sipping their coffee as the light faded and stars began to appear in the darkening sky. "I'll help you move your things to the school apartment tomorrow, if you'd like," Kane offered. "That's very kind, but I don't want to impose any further. You and Hannah have already done so much." Kane turned to look at her, his expression serious. "It's no imposition, Felicity." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Besides," he continued, "the apartment will need some attention before it's truly habitable. Hasn't been occupied for a few months." "Then I accept with gratitude," she said, as darkness settled completely over the ranch. Felicity reluctantly rose to go inside. At the door, she paused, looking back at Kane, who remained on the porch, his silhouette outlined against the star-filled sky. "I'm glad I missed that train," she said softly, then slipped inside before he could respond. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Felicity prepared for her move to town. Hannah helped her sort through her belongings, setting aside what she would need immediately and what could wait. The two women had formed a quick friendship, finding common ground in their love of literature and their experiences navigating a world that often underestimated women's capabilities. "I'm going to miss having another woman around," Hannah admitted as they folded Felicity's dresses. "Don't misunderstand, I love my brother dearly, but conversations with Kane can be somewhat limited," Felicity laughed. "He does seem to prefer actions to words. Always has, even as a boy," Hannah confirmed. "But there's no better man to have on your side when trouble comes." She gave Felicity a sidelong glance, He likes you, you know. Felicity felt heat rise to her cheeks. He's been very kind. It's more than kindness, Hannah said firmly. I haven't seen him take to anyone like this since before the war. It changed him, made him more cautious, more contained. But with you, he's almost the Kane I remember from childhood. Before Felicity could formulate a response, Kane appeared in the doorway and the conversation shifted to logistics of the move. By mid-morning, Kane had loaded Felicity's essential belongings onto the wagon, and they set off for Cottonwood once more. This time, Hannah accompanied them, eager to help make the school apartment comfortable. The town was quieter on Sunday morning, with many residents attending services at the small white church on the hill. Mayor Jenkins met them at the schoolhouse with keys to the apartment and the contract for Felicity to sign. School board approved everything, he said proudly, as if he had personally accomplished something significant. The children will gather at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mrs. Wilson will introduce you, then leave you to it. The reality of her new position settled over Felicity as she signed her name to the contract. 27 children of varying ages and abilities would be looking to her for guidance starting tomorrow. The challenge was daunting but also exhilarating. As Mayor Jenkins took his leave, Kane and Hannah began bringing in Felicity's belongings while she assessed the apartment more thoroughly. The rooms were dusty and stale from disuse, but structurally sound. The furniture was simple but functional: a bed, a dresser, a small table with 2 chairs, and a rocking chair by the window. "We'll need to give it a good cleaning," Hannah declared, already rolling up her sleeves. "Kane, fetch water from the pump in the schoolyard. We'll need plenty." For the next several hours, the three of them worked to transform the neglected space into a home. Kane fixed loose floorboards and a stuck window, while Hannah and Felicity scrubbed, dusted, and arranged. By mid-afternoon, the apartment was unrecognizable, clean, organized, and welcoming. "What do you think?" Hannah asked as they surveyed their work. "It's perfect," Felicity said sincerely. "I can't thank you both enough." "Every teacher needs books," Kane said, disappearing down to the wagon. He returned with a small crate which he set on the table. Inside were several volumes of collected works of Shakespeare, Dickens' Great Expectations, a book of poems by Tennyson, and a well-worn copy of the Bible. "From our family library," Hannah explained. "We thought you might like some reading material, and perhaps some could be used for the older students." Felicity ran her fingers over the leather bindings, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "This is incredibly generous. I'll treasure them." Kane shrugged, looking slightly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Just books gathering dust at the ranch. Better they're used." But Felicity understood the value of books in this remote territory and the significance of the gesture. These weren't just any books, they were part of the Dawsons' personal history, a connection to their past being entrusted to her care. As the sun began its westward descent, Hannah suggested they should return to the ranch. "You'll want time to settle in properly before tomorrow," she said to Felicity. The moment of parting came with unexpected emotion. Hannah embraced Felicity warmly, extracting a promise to visit the ranch the following Sunday. Kane stood awkwardly to one side, hat in hands, seemingly uncertain of the appropriate farewell. "I'll check on you tomorrow after school," he finally said. "Make sure everything's all right." "I'd like that," Felicity replied, holding his gaze. After they left, Felicity stood in the center of her new home, surrounded by her belongings and the silence of the empty schoolhouse below. For the first time in years, she felt truly independent, solely responsible for her fate in a way that both frightened and liberated her. As darkness fell, she lit the lamps and sat in the rocking chair by the window, watching as Cottonwood's evening rhythms unfolded, lamps being lit in homes, horses being stabled for the night, the saloon down the street coming to life with piano music and laughter. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter, fraught with challenges but also possibilities. And somehow, knowing that Kane Dawson would be checking on her made the prospect less daunting than it might have been. Morning arrived with a riot of birdsong and the distant sound of cottonwood awakening. Felicity had been up since before dawn, too nervous to sleep, preparing for her first day. She dressed with care in a high-necked navy blue dress that she hoped struck the right balance between authority and approachability, pinned her hair in a neat bun, and reviewed her hastily assembled lesson plans one final time. At precisely 7:30, she descended to the schoolroom and began writing her name on the blackboard in her clear, elegant script, Miss Felicity Summers. The chalk dust caught the early morning sunlight streaming through the windows, creating a golden haze that seemed almost magical. By 7:45, children began arriving, some alone, some in sibling groups, some accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher. Felicity greeted each one with a smile, memorizing names and faces as quickly as she could. Mrs. Wilson arrived at 7:05, her rounded figure moving with surprising grace as she guided the last stragglers to their seats. The room hummed with whispered conversations and the shuffling of feet as 27 curious children sized up their new instructor. "Good morning, children," Mrs. Wilson called, bringing immediate silence. "As you know, I must step down as your teacher. Today I'm pleased to introduce Miss Summers, who has come all the way from Boston to teach you. I expect you to show her the same respect you've shown me." 27 pairs of eyes, ranging from the wide-eyed curiosity of 6-year-old Sally Tucker to the skeptical assessment of 16-year-old Thomas McAllister, focused on Felicity as she stepped forward. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," Felicity said, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I'm delighted to be here and look forward to learning with all of you." After Mrs. Wilson's departure, Felicity began the process of assessing her students' abilities, setting the younger children to copying letters while she tested the older ones on arithmetic and reading. By mid-morning, she had a clearer understanding of the educational landscape, a handful of advanced students who could benefit from more challenging material, a solid middle group working at grade level, and several who struggled with basic skills. The morning passed in a blur of activity, and when the lunch bell rang, Felicity was surprised to find herself enjoying the challenge. The children filed out to eat their packed lunches in the schoolyard, leaving her a moment of quiet to collect her thoughts. She was just unwrapping her own simple lunch when a knock at the door drew her attention. Kane stood in the doorway, hat in hand, a tentative expression on his face. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "Not at all," Felicity replied, genuinely pleased to see him. "The children are having lunch outside." Kane stepped into the schoolroom, his tall frame and outdoor weathered appearance somewhat incongruous among the small desks and educational charts. "How's the first day?" he asked, genuinely interested. "Challenging but rewarding," she answered honestly. "They're good children for the most part. Some need more attention than others, but that's to be expected." Kane nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "You seem like a natural teacher." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. I've always loved helping others discover new ideas." He glanced around the schoolroom, his gaze landing on the sparse bookshelves. "School could use more books." "Yes," Felicity agreed. "I was thinking of organizing a book drive, perhaps, asking families to donate what they can." "Good idea," Kane said. "I know the Mercantile gets catalogs from back east. Might be able to order some as well." There was a moment of silence, not uncomfortable but charged with unspoken thoughts. Kane cleared his throat. "Main reason I came by, there's a harvest social at the Wilsons' ranch this Saturday. Dancing, food, that sort of thing." He shifted his weight, suddenly looking less sure of himself than Felicity had yet seen. "Thought you might like to go meet more folks from around here." Felicity felt a flutter of pleasure at the invitation. "I'd like that very much." "Good. I'll pick you up at 5 if that suits." Before she could respond, the schoolyard erupted with children's voices as they began returning from lunch. Kane straightened, reaching for the door. "I should let you get back to teaching," he said. "Just wanted to make sure you were settling in all right." "I am," Felicity assured him. "Thank you for checking on me." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture she was coming to find endearing. "See you Saturday, then." As he left, several of the older girls giggled, clearly intrigued by the handsome rancher's visit to their new teacher. Felicity called the class to order, ignoring the knowing looks exchanged among her students. The rest of the day passed in a productive rhythm as Felicity established routines and expectations. By the time she dismissed the children at 4 o'clock, she was exhausted but satisfied. Most had responded well to her teaching style, and even the more resistant students had shown glimmers of engagement. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Felicity reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 3 days. The missed train that had seemed such a disaster had led her to this place, to Kane and Hannah, to 27 children who needed her skills, to a community where she might truly belong. For the first time since Edward had broken their engagement, claiming she was too independent-minded for a future politician's wife, Felicity felt genuinely hopeful about her future. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk as she chose. And on Saturday, she would be walking it beside Kane Dawson, a prospect that brought a smile to her lips and a lightness to her heart that had been absent for too long. The week passed in a blur of activity as Felicity established her teaching routine and familiarized herself with Cottonwood's rhythms. Each day brought new challenges and satisfactions in the classroom, from helping young Sally Tucker finally master the letter S to engaging Thomas McAllister with advanced mathematics that actually seemed to interest the usually sullen teenager. The townspeople had welcomed her warmly, stopping by the school to introduce themselves or inviting her to take tea. She dined with the doctor and his wife on Wednesday evening and had been invited to Sunday dinner after church by 3 different families. Kane had not returned to the school after Monday, but Felicity found herself thinking of him, often remembering his quiet strength, his understated kindness, the rare but transformative smile that seemed to light his entire face. The anticipation of seeing him again on Saturday created an undercurrent of excitement that carried her through the week's challenges. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, with just enough autumn chill to justify a shawl but not enough to require heavy wraps. Felicity spent the morning grading spelling tests and planning the next week's lessons, then turned her attention to preparing for the social. She bathed using the basin in her room, washing her hair and letting it dry by the open window as she considered her limited wardrobe options. The blue dress she'd worn to teach was too severe for a social gathering, and her traveling outfit too practical. Finally, she settled on a gown of deep green silk that she had brought for formal occasions in San Francisco, perhaps slightly too elegant for a country social, but the only suitable option available. As she dressed, Felicity found herself taking unusual care with her appearance, arranging her chestnut hair in a more flattering style than her usual severe teaching bun, adding a touch of rose water to her wrists, selecting her mother's pearl earrings from her small jewelry case. At precisely 5 o'clock, a knock at the door downstairs announced Kane's arrival. Felicity took a final glance in the small mirror, drew a deep breath to calm her inexplicably racing heart, and descended the stairs. Kane waited in the schoolroom, hat in hand, looking distinctly different from his usual appearance. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore a clean white shirt under a black vest with pressed trousers and polished boots. He had clearly made an effort, and the result was striking, transforming the rugged rancher into a notably handsome gentleman. He looked up as she entered, and the expression that crossed his face made Felicity glad she had chosen the green silk. Something like admiration, perhaps even awe, flashed in his eyes before he composed himself. "Miss Summers," he said, his deep voice carrying a note she hadn't heard before. "You look beautiful." The directness of the compliment caught her off guard, bringing warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Dawson. You look quite handsome yourself." A hint of color touched his tanned face and he cleared his throat. "Shall we go? Hannah's already at the Wilsons' helping with the preparations." Outside, Felicity was surprised to find not the familiar wagon but a polished buggy with a sleek bay horse in the traces. Kane helped her up, his hand strong and warm around hers, then climbed up beside her. The seat was narrower than the wagon's, bringing them into closer proximity than before. "You went to some trouble," Felicity observed as they set off. Kane glanced at her, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Seemed appropriate. Wagons fine for hauling supplies, but not for escorting a lady to a social." The Wilsons' ranch was larger than Kane's, with a sprawling main house and several outbuildings. Lanterns had been strung between the barn and the house, creating a festive atmosphere in the gathering dusk. A fiddler was already playing on the porch, and several couples were dancing in the yard while children chased each other around the edges. As Kane helped Felicity down from the buggy, Hannah spotted them and hurried over, her face alight with pleasure. "You came," she exclaimed, embracing Felicity warmly. "And don't you look lovely? That color suits you perfectly." She gave her brother an approving glance. "You clean up nicely too, Kane." Kane rolled his eyes at his sister's teasing, but there was affection in the gesture. "Where should we put the pie?" he asked, retrieving a covered dish from the buggy. "You brought pie?" Felicity asked, surprised. "Apple," Kane confirmed. "My mother's recipe. Hannah taught me how to make it." This unexpected domestic skill endeared him to Felicity even further. She followed the siblings to a long table laden with food, where Hannah introduced her to their hosts. The Wilsons no relation to Mrs. Wilson from the Mercantile, as Hannah hastily explained. The evening unfolded in a whirl of introductions, conversation, delicious food, and eventually, dancing. Felicity found herself welcomed into the community with genuine warmth, her position as the new schoolteacher granting her immediate respect and interest. After supper, the fiddler was joined by a man with a harmonica and another with a guitar, and the dancing began in earnest. Kane, who had remained close to Felicity throughout the evening, cleared his throat as the musicians struck up a waltz. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, his usual confidence seemingly diminished by the prospect of the dance floor. "I'd be delighted," Felicity replied, placing her hand in his outstretched one. Kane led her to the area cleared for dancing and placed his hand tentatively at her waist. For a man of such physical capability, he seemed almost nervous, but as they began to move with the music, his natural grace asserted itself. He guided her confidently through the steps, their movements synchronizing with surprising ease. "You dance very well," Felicity remarked, looking up at him with genuine appreciation. "My mother insisted all her children learn," Kane explained. "Said it was a necessary social grace even in the territories." "She was right," Felicity said, enjoying the feeling of being led so capably around the floor. "Though I confess I'm surprised. You don't strike me as a man who frequents dances." A shadow crossed his face briefly. "Haven't danced much since the war, haven't had much reason to." The simple statement, delivered without self-pity but with quiet honesty, touched something deep within Felicity. She understood what he wasn't saying, that the war had taken more from him than just years of his life. It had taken his youth, his carefree spirit, perhaps even his faith in simple pleasures. "I'm glad you're dancing now," she said softly. His eyes met hers, intense and searching. "So am I." They danced 3 more dances before taking a break for refreshments. As Kane went to fetch them lemonade, Felicity found herself surrounded by a group of women eager to hear about life in Boston and Chicago. She answered their questions graciously, all the while aware of Kane's movements at the edge of her vision. Later, as the evening cooled, Kane suggested a walk away from the crowd. They strolled toward a small rise where a lone oak tree stood silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The music and laughter from the party created a pleasant backdrop to their own quiet conversation. "Are you settling in all right?" Kane asked as they reached the tree. "At the school, I mean." "Yes, very well," Felicity replied. "The children are responding beautifully and everyone has been so welcoming." She paused, then added sincerely, I've never felt so quickly at home anywhere." Kane nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. Cottonwood's a good town. Good people." "Including you," Felicity said softly. "I still can't believe how fortunate I was that you happened to be at the station when I missed that train." Kane was silent for a moment, his profile strong against the night sky. "Wasn't exactly coincidence," he finally said. "I'd been to Prescott for supplies. Stopped at the station to send a telegram, saw you waiting there looking worried, then when the train pulled away." He shrugged. "Couldn't just leave you standing there." Felicity was touched by this revelation. "Well, coincidence or not, I'm grateful. Missing that train turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to me." He turned to face her fully then, his expression more open than she had yet seen it. "Felicity," he began, then seemed to struggle for words. "Yes," she encouraged when he fell silent. "I'm not good with words," he admitted. "Never have been, but I want you to know that having you here in Cottonwood, it's been." He trailed off again, frustration evident in the set of his jaw. Felicity took a step closer, drawn by something in his eyes that spoke more eloquently than words. "It's been what, Kane?" "It's been like seeing color again after years of gray," he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I don't expect anything. It's too soon, I know that. But I want you to know that if you decide to stay in Cottonwood permanently, I'd be honored if you'd allow me to court you properly." The declaration, delivered with such earnest simplicity, took Felicity's breath away. Since Edward had ended their engagement, she had closed off the possibility of romance from her life, focusing instead on her career and independence. But here, under the vast Arizona sky, with this strong, honorable man looking at her as if she were something precious, those protective barriers began to crumble. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." Something like wonder crossed Kane's face, followed by a smile that transformed his features completely. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both gentle and reverent. When they parted, Felicity felt as if something fundamental had shifted within her, as if some part of her that had been adrift had finally found its mooring. Kane's arms remained around her waist, and she rested her hands lightly on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "We should get back," he said reluctantly. "Before Hannah sends out a search party." Felicity nodded, but neither of them moved immediately, reluctant to break the moment. Finally, with a sigh, Kane offered her his arm and they walked back toward the festivities, both aware that something significant had changed between them. Hannah gave them a knowing look when they rejoined the party, but made no comment. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant haze for Felicity, who found herself hyper-aware of Kane's presence beside her, his hand occasionally brushing hers, his voice a reassuring rumble as he conversed with neighbors and friends. As the party wound down and they prepared to leave, Hannah announced that she would be staying to help with cleanup and would return to the ranch in the morning with the Wilsons. "I'm sure Kane won't mind seeing you safely home," she said to Felicity, her innocent tone belied by the twinkle in her eyes. The drive back to Cottonwood was magical. The night had grown cooler, and Kane wrapped a blanket around Felicity's shoulders, his arm remaining across the back of the seat. They spoke little, both content in the companionable silence and the shared understanding of new possibilities stretching before them. At the schoolhouse, Kane helped Felicity down from the buggy and walked her to the door. In the silver moonlight, his features were both strong and gentle, a combination that Felicity found increasingly captivating. "Thank you for a wonderful evening," she said, reluctant for it to end. "Thank you for coming with me," he replied. Then, with a hesitation that was endearing in such a capable man, he added, "May I call on you tomorrow, after church, perhaps?" "I'd like that," Felicity said, her heart lightening at the prospect of seeing him again so soon. Kane nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good night, then," he said softly, then leaned down to place another gentle kiss on her lips. "Sleep well, Felicity." As she watched him drive away, Felicity touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the warmth of his kiss. Never could she have imagined, when she boarded that train in Chicago, that her journey would lead her here, not to San Francisco and the prestigious academy, but to a small frontier town and a quiet rancher with haunted eyes and a gentle heart. "You're not alone now," Kane had said when they met. And standing in the doorway of what was now her home, Felicity realized the truth of those words more profoundly than ever. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, she felt truly not alone, not just physically accompanied, but understood, valued, and beginning to be loved for exactly who she was. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that Felicity found deeply satisfying. Her days were filled with teaching, her evenings often spent in Kane's company as their courtship progressed with deliberate care. True to his word, he called on her after church that first Sunday, bringing a bouquet of wildflowers he had gathered on his way to town. They walked through Cottonwood, talking easily about everything and nothing, before he escorted her to dinner at the doctor's home where several other residents had gathered. Throughout the autumn months, Kane found reasons to visit Cottonwood regularly. Supplies were needed, business at the bank required attention. A book he thought might interest Felicity had arrived at the mercantile. Each visit included time spent with her, sometimes just brief conversations at the schoolhouse, sometimes longer excursions when her duties allowed. On Sundays, he would drive her to the ranch for dinner with Hannah, who had become a dear friend. These afternoons were Felicity's favorite relaxed, familial gatherings where conversation flowed easily and laughter was frequent. She watched Kane soften in these moments, the weight of his past seeming lighter in the warmth of home and hearth. As October gave way to November, Felicity became aware of whispers and knowing glances from the townspeople. Her courtship with Kane was common knowledge, viewed with general approval, and more than a little romantic interest by the community. Several of the women had taken to dropping hints about appropriate wedding dates and the advantages of a spring ceremony. Felicity found these presumptions both amusing and somewhat alarming. While her feelings for Kane deepened with each encounter, marriage seemed a distant prospect. They had known each other for such a short time, and both carried wounds from their pasts that needed healing before such a commitment could be contemplated. The first snow of the season fell in early December, transforming Cottonwood into a winter wonderland that enchanted Felicity. Having spent most of her life in cities where snow quickly turned to gray slush, the pristine beauty of the wilderness under its white blanket took her breath away. Kane arrived at the schoolhouse that evening with a sleigh he had borrowed from a neighbor, the bells on the harness creating a merry jingling as they glided through the twilight. Bundled in blankets against the cold, they toured the countryside, Kane pointing out landmarks now transformed by snow. "It's so beautiful," Felicity breathed, her words creating puffs of vapor in the crisp air. "I've never seen anything like it." Kane's gaze was on her face rather than the scenery. "Neither have I," he said softly. The simple sincerity of the words warmed Felicity more than any blanket could. She leaned against him, accepting the arm he placed around her shoulders, and they continued their journey in contented silence. As Christmas approached, excitement built in the schoolhouse. Felicity organized a holiday pageant, assigning parts and supervising the creation of simple costumes and props. Kane volunteered to build a small stage in the schoolroom, working evenings after the children had gone home, often with Felicity helping or simply keeping him company as they talked about their days. It was during one of these evenings, as Kane measured lumber while Felicity sewed angel wings for 6-year-old Sally Tucker, that he spoke about his experiences during the Civil War. The topic had remained largely untouched between them, though Felicity had sensed its importance in shaping the man Kane had become. "I was 19 when I enlisted," he said, his voice steady but distant, as if recounting someone else's story. "Thought I was doing the right thing. Fighting to preserve the Union, end slavery, noble causes. He paused, his hands stilling on the wood. But there's nothing noble about war itself, nothing glorious in watching friends die and taking lives yourself. Felicity set aside her sewing, giving him her full attention. She didn't speak, sensing he needed to continue without interruption. Served with the 1st Minnesota Volunteer Infantry, he went on, fought at Bull Run, Antietam, Fredericksburg. His voice dropped lower. Gettysburg. The name hung in the air between them. Even Felicity, with her limited knowledge of military history, recognized the significance of that battle. Our regiment was ordered to charge a Confederate brigade, Kane said after a long moment. Suicide mission, essentially, meant to buy time for the rest of the Union line to reorganize. 262 of us went in, 47 came out unwounded. He picked up his measuring tape again, his movements mechanical. I was one of them, never understood why I survived when better men didn't. Felicity moved to his side, placing her hand gently on his arm. I'm grateful you did, she said simply. Kane looked at her, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of pain and hope. For a long time afterward felt like I was living on borrowed time, like my life wasn't really my own anymore. He covered her hand with his touch gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. Until recently. The implication was clear, and Felicity felt tears prick at her eyes. Kane, she whispered, not knowing what else to say but needing to acknowledge the depth of what he was sharing. You don't have to say anything, he assured her, just wanted you to understand why I am the way I am sometimes. Thank you for telling me, she said, squeezing his hand, for trusting me with this. He nodded, then returned to his work, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a stronger connection forged through honest vulnerability. The Christmas pageant was a resounding success, with every child performing their part with enthusiasm if not always precision. Parents and townspeople packed the schoolhouse, applauding generously and praising Felicity's work with the children. Kane sat in the back row, his quiet pride in her accomplishments evident in his expression whenever their eyes met across the crowded room. For Christmas Day, Kane and Hannah insisted that Felicity join them at the ranch. They arrived to collect her in the morning, the wagon festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons in celebration of the holiday. Hannah had prepared a feast that would have impressed even Boston's finest hostesses, and the simple cabin had been transformed with greenery, candles, and handmade decorations. After dinner, they exchanged gifts by the fire. Hannah had knitted Felicity a beautiful blue shawl, while Felicity presented her friend with a leather-bound journal and an illustrated volume of Tennyson's poems. For Kane, Felicity had commissioned a new saddle blanket from the local weaver, embroidered with his initials. It's perfect, he said, running his hand over the fine workmanship. Thank you. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Inside, Felicity found a delicate silver locket on a slender chain. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with a small flower etched on its surface. Open it, Kane encouraged softly. Inside the locket was a tiny pressed wildflower, the same type as had been in the first bouquet he had brought her after the harvest social. It's beautiful, Felicity said, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Will you help me put it on? Kane fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers brushing against her skin with gentle care. The locket rested just below her collarbone, a tangible symbol of the connection growing between them. As winter settled over the territory, Felicity found her life falling into patterns that brought deep satisfaction. Her students were progressing well, her friendships in the community were flourishing, and her relationship with Kane continued to deepen with each passing week. January brought heavy snows that sometimes made travel between the ranch and town difficult. But Kane made the journey whenever weather permitted, often staying at the hotel in Cottonwood when storms threatened to strand him. These periods of enforced separation only strengthened Felicity's growing certainty that what she felt for Kane was not merely affection or attraction, but love, a deeper, more mature love than she had ever experienced before. In February, as the first hints of spring began to appear in the form of longer days and occasional thaws, Kane invited Felicity to ride with him to see a property adjacent to his ranch that had recently come up for sale. "The Taylor place," he explained as they rode across land beginning to emerge from winter's grip. "Old man Taylor passed last month. His son's in California, not interested in ranching, looking to sell quickly. Are you considering buying it?" Felicity asked, enjoying the rare opportunity to ride beside Kane in the open countryside. Kane nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Would nearly double the size of my spread. Good water rights, decent grazing land." He glanced at her. "Been saving for something like this. Expansion, I mean." They crested a small rise and Kane reined in his horse, gesturing at the vista before them. A modest cabin stood in a sheltered valley, without buildings and corrals nearby. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods just beginning to show the first green buds of spring. "It's beautiful," Felicity said sincerely. "Could be," Kane agreed. "Needs work. Taylor let things slide these past few years." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "What do you think? As an investment, I mean." Felicity was touched that he valued her opinion on such a significant decision. "It seems sound from what little I know of ranching," she said. "The water source alone makes it valuable, I would think." Kane nodded, satisfaction in his expression. "My thoughts exactly." They spent the next hour exploring the property, with Kane pointing out its features and potential improvements. As they prepared to ride back to town, he grew uncharacteristically quiet, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there earlier. "Kane, is something wrong?" Felicity asked as they mounted their horses. He shook his head, then seemed to reconsider. "Not wrong, just, there's something I want to ask you and I'm not sure how." Felicity's heart quickened. "You can ask me anything," she said softly. Kane dismounted, then helped her down from her horse. Taking her hands in his, he looked into her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "Felicity, these past months have been the happiest I can remember. You've brought light back into my life when I'd resigned myself to shadows." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I think I've loved you since that first day at the train station when you stood there so determined despite everything going wrong." Tears welled in Felicity's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "I love you too, Kane," she whispered. A smile of pure joy transformed his face, making him look younger, unburdened by the past that had weighed so heavily on him when they first met. He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small box. "I had this all planned different," he admitted with a rueful shake of his head. "Dinner at the hotel, flowers, all of that, but being here on this land that could be our future." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Felicity Summers, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Felicity couldn't speak, overcome by the emotion of the moment. Then, with joyful certainty, she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite her tears. "Yes, I will marry you, Kane Dawson." Kane slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both were smiling, their happiness too great to be contained. "When?" Kane asked, his arms still around her waist. "Spring, like the town busybodies have been predicting. Summer. I don't want to rush you, but I don't want to wait too long either." Felicity laughed, feeling lighter than air. "Spring sounds perfect. After the school term ends in May, that would give us time to prepare and—" She hesitated, suddenly shy, and, Kane prompted gently. "And to make improvements to the cabin," she finished, nodding toward the Taylor property. "If we're going to live there." Kane's expression turned serious. "You'd be all right with that, living on the ranch instead of in town." It would mean giving up teaching, at least for a while. Felicity considered this. She loved teaching, but the prospect of building a life with Kane, of perhaps one day having children of their own to educate, held its own appeal. "I would miss the children," she admitted. "But perhaps I could still contribute somehow, tutoring those who need extra help, or teaching during winter months when travel is difficult. Relief washed over Kane's face. "We'll make it work," he promised. "Whatever makes you happy." As they rode back to Cottonwood, plans forming between them for both the wedding and their future, Felicity marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in just 5 months. The missed train that had seemed so catastrophic had led her directly to this moment, to this man, to a love and a future more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. That evening, when Kane left her at the schoolhouse door with a lingering kiss and a promise to return the next day to announce their engagement to Hannah, Felicity stood in the doorway watching until he disappeared from view. Her hand went to the locket at her throat, then to the ring now gracing her finger, tangible symbols of the journey from being left behind to finding where she truly belonged. The spring of 1878 unfolded in a flurry of activity as wedding preparations coincided with the end of the school term and Kane's acquisition of the Taylor property. The engagement was announced formally at church the Sunday following Kane's proposal, though few in town seemed surprised by the news. Congratulations poured in, along with offers of assistance for the ceremony and celebration. Hannah threw herself into wedding planning with enthusiasm, coordinating with the ladies of Cottonwood to ensure that, despite the frontier setting, Felicity would have as beautiful a ceremony as any Boston bride. The church would be decorated with wildflowers and evergreens. The hotel had agreed to host the reception, and seemingly every woman in town was contributing to the wedding feast. Meanwhile, Kane focused on improvements to the Taylor cabin, which would become their home after the wedding. With the help of friends and neighbors, he repaired the roof, replaced broken windows, and built new furniture, including a handsome 4-poster bed that made Felicity blush when she first saw it during a visit to the property. "Too much?" Kane had asked, concern creasing his brow at her reaction. "No," Felicity had assured him, placing her hand on the smooth wood of the bedpost. "It's beautiful. Perfect." The truth was that the bed and all it represented of their coming life together as husband and wife filled Felicity with a mixture of anticipation and nervous excitement. Her mother had died before she could share any wifely wisdom, and while Hannah had offered some gentle guidance, there remained a veil of mystery around the physical aspects of marriage that both thrilled and intimidated Felicity. As May approached, Felicity found herself increasingly torn between her teaching duties and the demands of wedding preparations. The school board had already hired her replacement, a young woman from California, who would arrive in June, but Felicity was determined that her students would not suffer any neglect during her final weeks as their teacher. One evening in late April, as she sat at her desk grading arithmetic tests long after the children had gone home, Kane arrived unexpectedly, concern evident in his expression. "Hannah said you missed supper at the hotel," he said, placing a covered plate on her desk. "Brought you something to eat." Felicity smiled gratefully, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "Thank you. I lost track of time." Kane pulled up a chair beside her desk, watching as she uncovered the plate to reveal chicken, potatoes, and greens from Hannah's garden. "You're working too hard," he observed. "Between the school and the wedding preparations. There's so much to do," Felicity sighed, taking a bite of chicken, "and I want everything to be perfect my last week's teaching our wedding." "It doesn't have to be perfect," Kane said gently, "just has to be us." The simple wisdom of his statement washed over Felicity like a cooling breeze. He was right, of course. In her determination to manage everything flawlessly, she had begun to lose sight of what truly mattered, not the details of the ceremony or the last few lessons of the school year, but the life they were building together. "You're right," she acknowledged, reaching for his hand. "I've been getting lost in the details." Kane squeezed her fingers, his touch reassuring. "What can I do to help?" "Just this," Felicity said softly. "Remind me what's important when I forget." He nodded, a gentle smile touching his lips. "Always." The remainder of the school term passed in a blur of final lessons, examinations, and farewells. On the last day, Felicity's students surprised her with a handmade quilt, each square contributed by a different family, a tangible memory of her time as Cottonwood's teacher. "So you don't forget us," Sally Tucker said earnestly as she helped present the gift. Tears filled Felicity's eyes as she gathered the little girl into a hug. "I could never forget any of you," she promised, "and I'll still be living nearby. You can visit me at the ranch anytime." The wedding was set for the third Saturday in May, when the spring wildflowers would be at their peak, and before the summer heat made outdoor celebrations uncomfortable. The week before the ceremony brought an unexpected visitor to Cottonwood Felicity's brother Richard. His telegram had arrived only a day before he did, giving Felicity little time to prepare for the reunion. She had written to him after accepting the teaching position in Cottonwood, and again to inform him of her engagement, but his responses had been brief and infrequent. Kane accompanied Felicity to the station to meet Richard's train, his steady presence a comfort as she anxiously scanned the disembarking passengers for her brother's familiar face. When she finally spotted him taller than she remembered, his face more lined, a complex mixture of emotions washed over her. Joy, resentment for his absence when she had needed him, hope for reconciliation. "Richard," she called, waving to catch his attention. Her brother turned at the sound of her voice, his expression softening as he caught sight of her. "Felicity," he said as he reached her, setting down his valise to embrace her awkwardly. "You look well." "I am well," she assured him, stepping back to include Kane in the conversation. "Richard, this is Kane Dawson, my fiancé. Kane, my brother Richard Summers." The two men sized each other up as they shook hands, Kane's expression carefully neutral, Richard's openly assessing. "Mr. Summers," Kane said with a nod. "Pleasure to meet you. Felicity speaks highly of you." "Mr. Dawson," Richard replied, his Boston accent more pronounced in contrast to Kane's Western cadence. "I must admit I was surprised by my sister's news. Your courtship seems to have progressed rather rapidly." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken by Felicity's deliberate cheerfulness. "Let's get your bags to the hotel, Richard. You must be exhausted after such a long journey." The walk to the hotel was strained, with Felicity maintaining a steady stream of conversation about Cottonwood and the coming wedding while Richard offered only brief responses, his attention seemingly focused on observing Kane. At the hotel, Kane excused himself, sensing the siblings needed time alone. "I'll come by for supper at 6, he told Felicity, brushing a light kiss against her cheek. "Take your time catching up." Once Kane had departed, Richard's demeanor changed subtly, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he unpacked his valise in the hotel room while Felicity sat in the room's single armchair. "He seems capable," Richard conceded, hanging his jacket in the wardrobe. "He is," Felicity agreed. "And kind and honest and everything I could hope for in a husband." Richard paused, turning to face his sister directly. "Are you certain, Felly? After what happened with Edward, I worry you might be rushing into this. You've known this man, what, 6 months?" "Almost 7, Felicity corrected, bristling slightly at the reminder of her failed engagement. "And yes, I am absolutely certain. Kane is nothing like Edward. He values me for who I am, not for who he wishes I would be." Richard had the grace to look abashed. "I only want your happiness," he said, his voice softening. "When your letter arrived announcing your engagement to a rancher in Arizona territory, I feared you might be making a decision out of, I don't know, rebellion, a desire to be as far from Chicago and Edward as possible." "It wasn't like that at all," Felicity assured him, her irritation fading at the genuine concern in her brother's voice. "It was unexpected, yes, but Kane and we fit together, Richard. I can't explain it better than that." Richard studied her face, seeming to search for something. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because he nodded slowly. "Then I'm happy for you," he said, with what appeared to be genuine sincerity. "And I apologize for not being at the station when you needed me." The business meeting ran longer than expected, and by the time I arrived, your train had gone. I tried to send telegrams ahead to the next stops, but it's in the past, Felicity said firmly. And as it turned out, missing that train was the best thing that ever happened to me. She stood, smoothing her skirts. Now, let me show you around Cottonwood before supper. It's small, but it's become home. By the time Kane joined them for the evening meal, the worst of the tension between the siblings had dissipated. Over supper at the hotel restaurant, Richard made a visible effort to know Kane better, asking about the ranch, his plans for expansion, and his thoughts on the territory's future. Arizona's likely to remain a territory for some time, Kane explained in response to one of Richard's questions. But that doesn't mean it isn't developing. The mining operations bring in capital, the railroad makes commerce easier, and there's good land for those willing to work it. Richard nodded, seemingly impressed by Kane's knowledge and articulation. And the native situation, is it safe? As safe as anywhere, Kane replied evenly. The Army's actions have pushed most of the Apache onto reservations. It's a complex situation and not one I entirely agree with in execution, but the open conflicts have mostly ended. The conversation continued to flow more easily as the meal progressed, and by the time they parted for the evening, Felicity felt cautiously optimistic that her brother and her future husband might, if not become friends, at least develop a mutual respect. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of final wedding preparations. Richard, having apparently accepted that the marriage would indeed take place, threw himself into being useful, offering to handle certain logistics and contributing generously to the celebration costs despite Felicity's protests. "Consider it my wedding gift," he insisted. "Since I failed to be here when you needed me before." The day before the wedding, Kane took Richard to see the Taylor property, now nearly ready for Felicity to move in. Felicity waited anxiously for their return, unsure how her Boston-bred brother would react to the modest cabin that would be her new home. When they returned in the late afternoon, both men appeared relaxed, even friendly, much to Felicity's relief. "Your fiancé has built you a fine home," Richard told her as they sat on the hotel's veranda. "Solid construction, good location. The craftsmanship on that bed frame is particularly impressive." Felicity blushed at the mention of the bed, but was pleased by her brother's approval. "So you think I'll be comfortable there?" "I think you'll be happy there," Richard corrected gently, "which is more important than mere comfort." That evening, the traditional dinner for the wedding party was held at the hotel. Hannah, who would stand as Felicity's maid of honor, had arranged everything beautifully, with wildflowers on every table and candles creating a warm, festive atmosphere. Kane's friend James Wilson, who had helped extensively with the cabin renovations, would serve as best man, while Richard would give the bride away. As Felicity looked around the table at the people who had become her family in such a short time, Kane, Hannah, Richard, and the various friends from Cottonwood who had welcomed her so warmly, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey that had brought her here had been unexpected, filled with detours and disappointments, but had led to a destination more perfect than any she could have planned. The wedding day dawned clear and mild, with just enough breeze to carry the scent of wildflowers through the open windows of the hotel room where Felicity prepared with Hannah's assistance. Her gown, ordered from a dressmaker in Prescott, was elegant in its simplicity ivory silk with delicate lace accents, a style suited to both the frontier setting and Felicity's natural grace. "You look beautiful," Hannah said, adjusting the small wreath of flowers that crowned Felicity's upswept hair. "My brother is a fortunate man." "I'm the fortunate one," Felicity replied, touching the silver locket that Kane had given her at Christmas, which she wore as her something old for the wedding. A knock at the door announced Richard's arrival to escort her to the church. He paused in the doorway, his expression softening as he took in his sister's appearance. "Mother would be so proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Father, too. Tears threatened, but Felicity blinked them back, not wanting to ruin Hannah's careful work with her appearance. "Thank you, Richard. That means more than I can say." The small church was filled to capacity with what seemed like the entire population of Cottonwood and the surrounding ranches. As the simple melody of Wedding March played on the church's pump organ, Felicity walked down the aisle on Richard's arm, her eyes fixed on Kane, who waited for her at the altar. He looked handsome in his new suit, his usually tanned face slightly pale with what she recognized as nervous anticipation. But as their eyes met, a smile of such pure joy spread across his features that any lingering doubts Felicity might have harbored evaporated completely. This was right. This was where she belonged. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with vows exchanged in clear, steady voices and rings placed on trembling fingers. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Kane's kiss was gentle yet possessive, a promise of both tenderness and passion that sent a thrill through Felicity from head to toe. The celebration that followed at the hotel was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice the number of guests present. Kane and Felicity moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, always finding their way back to each other as if drawn by some invisible force. As the evening deepened, they shared a dance, moving together with the same natural harmony they had discovered at the harvest social months before. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Kane asked, his voice low and intimate despite the crowded room. "Completely, Mr. Dawson," Felicity replied, savoring the sound of her new name. "And you, more than I ever thought possible," he admitted, his arms tightening slightly around her waist. "Still can't believe my luck finding you stranded at that station." "It wasn't luck," Felicity said softly. "It was destiny." Kane smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that still made her heart skip. "Never believed in destiny before," he said, "but I'm starting to." As the celebration began to wind down, Felicity changed from her wedding gown into a traveling dress, and the guests gathered to see the newlyweds off. Rice and flower petals showered them as they made their way to the waiting buggy, decorated with ribbons and flowers for the occasion. Richard embraced Felicity warmly before she climbed into the buggy. "I'm returning to Boston tomorrow," he told her, "but I'll visit again, I promise, and you must come east sometime, both of you." "We will," Felicity assured him, touched by this evidence of her brother's acceptance of her new life. Hannah's farewell was more emotional, with tears streaming unashamedly down her face as she hugged first Felicity, then her brother. "Be happy," she whispered to them both. "You deserve it." The drive to their new home was magical, with the setting sun painting the landscape in gold and the spring air filled with the scent of sagebrush and wildflowers. Kane drove with one hand, the other wrapped firmly around Felicity's, as if he couldn't bear to break physical contact with her. When they arrived at the cabin, Kane surprised Felicity by lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold, a gesture that made her laugh with delight. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, candles were lit, and a fire crackled in the hearth, creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome. "Hannah," Kane explained, setting Felicity gently on her feet. "She came ahead to prepare everything." "It's perfect," Felicity said, turning in a slow circle to take in what was now her home, their home. Kane watched her, his expression a mixture of pride and vulnerability that touched her deeply. "Welcome home, Felicity Dawson," he said softly. Later that night, as they lay together in the handsome four-poster bed, Felicity rested her head on Kane's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Their coming together as husband and wife had been everything she had hoped for, tender, passionate, a physical expression of the love that had grown between them over the past months. "What are you thinking?" Kane murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I'm exactly where I'm meant to be," Felicity replied honestly. "That being left behind at that station was actually the universe making sure I found my way to you." Kane's arm tightened around her, drawing her closer. "When I saw you standing there, looking so lost but still so determined, something in me recognized you," he said, his voice low in the darkness. "Not your face or your name, but something deeper, like my soul knew yours." Tears pricked at Felicity's eyes at the unexpected poetry from this usually taciturn man. "I felt it too," she whispered. "When you said I wasn't alone anymore, it was like finally coming home after being lost for so long." Kane shifted, bringing his face level with hers on the pillow. In the soft glow of the banked fire, his eyes held an intensity that still took her breath away. "I love you, Felicity Dawson," he said simply, "more than I have words to express." "I love you too," she replied, reaching up to trace the beloved contours of his face. "And we have a lifetime for you to find those words." As she settled back into his embrace, Felicity thought of the journey that had brought her here from Boston to Chicago to this remote cabin in Arizona territory. None of it had gone according to her careful plans, yet the outcome was infinitely more satisfying than anything she could have orchestrated. The train she had missed had led her to Kane, to a community that valued her, to a life filled with purpose and love. What had seemed like abandonment had actually been the beginning of finding where and with whom she truly belonged. Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky glittered with stars, silent witnesses to the new life beginning within the cabin's walls. Inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Kane and Felicity Dawson drifted to sleep, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. For Felicity, the woman who had once been left behind when a train pulled away, had found something far more valuable than any destination that train could have carried her to. She had found her way home.